Okay, so let's get right into it. For decades, there's been this one language just quietly running a huge chunk of the internet, and that's PHP. But now, in a world full of microservices, AI, all that cool stuff, there's this huge debate, right? Is PHP still the king, or has it finally been dethroned?
So before we even get into the weeds of the debate, let's just start with one staggering fact. Get this. According to the latest data, over 73% of all websites where we actually know the server-side language are running on PHP. Yeah, that's nearly 3 out of every 4 sites you click on. Just think about that for a second.
And that's the big question, isn't it? I mean, if it's running most of the web, why are we even talking about its future? Why do you hear all this chatter about developers jumping ship? Well, that's exactly what we're going to unpack today.
All right, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with why the king is being questioned, then look at the case against PHP, and of course, the modern defense for it. After that, we'll get into a really key point, the architectural divide. Then a quick look at the security question, and we'll wrap up with how you can choose the right tech stack.
Okay, Section 1, the king is questioned. Look, PHP's dominance is undeniable. It's legendary, really. It made building dynamic websites possible for millions of people. But here's the thing, the internet has changed a lot. The web it was built for is just not the web we live on today.
Which brings us right to our next section, the case against PHP. You see, as apps get more and more complex and need to handle massive scale, a lot of developers are starting to feel like PHP just isn't cutting it anymore. They're looking for alternatives.
So what are we actually talking about here? Well, for one, performance can really start to struggle under huge transaction volumes. And then there's the whole ecosystem for things like AI and machine learning. It's just not as built out as, say, Python's. Plus, developers run into real challenges when they try to build with modern microservices or even just containerize things with Docker.
And look, this isn't just some abstract idea. Here's a quote from a software developer, Mobin Shatarian, who actually made the switch. He said, "As my projects grew in complexity, I began to encounter the limitations. PHP and Laravel were no longer sufficient for these demands." It's a perfect summary of that feeling when your trusty tools just can't handle the new, bigger jobs you're throwing at them.
Okay, but that's only one side of the coin, right? It's time for the defense. Because let me tell you, the PHP of today is a completely different beast than the one you might remember from even 5 years ago. Reports of its death are, well, you know the saying.
So that old argument you always hear, oh, PHP is slow, it's not true anymore. It's completely outdated. The latest versions like PHP 8.2 are screaming fast. We're talking almost 3 times faster than older versions, and they use way less memory. For handling high traffic, that is an absolute game changer.
This is where we really have to separate myth from reality. That whole spaghetti code thing, that's a throwback to the old days, before modern frameworks like Laravel came along and basically forced you to write clean, organized code. And the idea that it's just for WordPress, come on, it's a first-class language for building huge, complex apps. And insecure? Not really. Modern frameworks give you tons of protection against common threats right out of the box.
This whole thing brings us to a much deeper point. The debate often isn't really about PHP versus, say, Python or Go. It's about something more fundamental. It's about architecture. It's not just the language. It's how you build.
So on one side, you've got what's called a monolithic architecture. You can think of it like one big unified application. All the different parts, your customer service, your product catalog, the shopping cart, they're all tangled up together in a single code base. It's usually way easier to get started this way, but man, it can become a nightmare to scale and maintain later on.
Yeah, this diagram shows it perfectly. You've got this one giant application. All the services are tightly coupled, sharing a single database. What's the problem? Well, if one little piece gets overloaded or breaks, the whole thing can come crashing down, and scaling just one part of it is a huge pain. The other way to do it is with a microservices architecture. Instead of one big blob, you break your application down into a bunch of small, independent services. Each one does one specific thing and one thing only. They're not all tangled up. They just talk to each other when they need to.
And here you can see what that looks like. Each function is its own little service. So let's say your product search is getting hammered with traffic. No problem. You just scale up the product service. The shopping cart and customer services, they don't even notice. It makes the whole system way more resilient. But yeah, it's definitely more complex to manage.
Okay, and check this out. The performance difference when you're under a heavy load is just wow. These graphs tell the whole story. On the left, you've got the monolith. See how as traffic increases, the response time goes all over the place. It's struggling. Now look at the microservices graph on the right. It's almost flat, stable, efficient. The study this came from found that under heavy load, the monolith's error rate could shoot past 60%. Meanwhile, the microservices just kept chugging along. That's literally the difference between your site working and being completely broken.
All right, let's shift gears for a second and talk about something that's super important but often gets pushed to the side in these tech debates, and that's security. Not just theoretical security, but what happens out there in the real world.
So there was this big security study done at Stanford. They looked at a bunch of apps built by freelancers and startups, and this chart shows the language distribution. The first thing that jumps out is that PHP was by far the most common language used by the freelancers they studied, which, just shows how popular it is in that space.
But here's the kicker. The study found that those freelance-built PHP apps had an average vulnerability rate that was more than 3 times higher than the overall average. Now, hold on. Does this mean PHP itself is insecure? Not necessarily. The argument from the PHP community is that this isn't a flaw in the language, but a reflection of how it's sometimes used, maybe without the safety nets of modern frameworks. It really highlights how important best practices are.
Okay, so where does that leave us? We've looked at the pros, the cons, the architecture, the security question. It all boils down to this. When it's time to choose your tech stack, there's no magic bullet. There's just no single best choice. It's all about picking the right tool for the job. Are you a startup trying to get an MVP out the door like yesterday? Then something like Laravel, Node.js, or Python is probably your best bet for speed. Are you building something that needs to scale and handle insane traffic? You should probably be looking at Go or Java with microservices. Doing anything with AI or automation? It's gotta be Python. Its ecosystem is just unmatched. And if your system absolutely positively cannot go down, well, that's where something like Elixir shines with its fault tolerance.
And that's really the heart of it, isn't it? This isn't some grand battle of PHP versus the world. All those endless online flame wars about which language is best, they completely miss the point. The real job is to look at your project. What are its specific needs? And then choose the right tool for that specific job.
So let me leave you with this final thought. For your next project, what's more important? Sticking with the tool you know inside and out, mastering it, even if it's not a perfect match for the problem, or taking the time to learn and adopt the perfect tool for the job, even if it's new to you? The answer to that question really says everything about your approach to building things.